Well, it's a lot easier to hunt when you got a deep room of Georgia quarterbacks. Jake Rowe, we start the Georgia show tonight with a little bit of breaking news, I guess, if you want to call it that. Take it away, man.
Well, I mean, it's word started to come out a little bit earlier today. I got to give Rusty Mansell over at Dogs 24/7 a lot of credit. I think he had it first. That sounding like it was expected that Brock Vandagriff would stay for his for I can't even hardly keep up with this anymore. Redshirt sophomore season, his for the 2023 season. Believe it or not, Carson Beck and Brock Vandagriff had the exact same. It's like they're in the same class. They have the exact same amount of years left and eligibility left because Brock came in 2021. Carson came in 2020. Well, 2020 didn't count. They both redshirted in 2021. Neither of them redshirted last year, so they're both redshirt sophomores. But Brock Vandagriff is in fact coming back. We have confirmed that. We've double confirmed that. We've talked to several sources at this point. We've kind of let okay, is this an emotional decision? Could things change? Could things start to shift a different way? It doesn't sound like that's going to happen. There's always, when you're talking about people making a decision and there's time left to make that decision, minds could change. I mean, Kirby Smart could send this guy a cross text message on accident. I don't know. All sorts of things could happen. But as of right now, Brock Vandagriff is staying at Georgia. He has made that decision, and I think it's big for Georgia because a few things are at play here. One, you get people every year who say, it's a spring game, not going to be able to glean too much from it. Spring game's over, and they have a list of things that are the end-all, be-all. And one of those, for a lot of Georgia fans this year, is that Carson Beck is the starter. Folks, I had people coming away from that first scrimmage thinking that Brock Vandagriff was going to be Georgia's starter, okay? So the second scrimmage, they were probably a little bit more even, and then Carson Beck was a lot more, composed and locked in the third scrimmage. I definitely think Carson Beck's ahead. We maintain that. I'm not saying Brock Vandagriff's out of it though. Carson Beck made a lot of strides between spring and summer of his of last year. His third year on campus, despite the fact they've got the same eligibility left. Brock Vandagriff could do the same. He's got to clean up some mechanical stuff, and there's some experience he needs to get. But either way, we're talking about a guy who, if he comes, with him coming back to Georgia with that schedule, you've got a guy's probably going to see 100, 200 snaps this year of mop-up duty. I mean, he's going to get a chance to play a lot, and he's one snap away from Jake Fromm in this thing. Jake Fromm in this thing. So
yeah, that's a great point. The Wally Pipp situation.
Yeah, and I'm not saying he would even do that, but just in terms of getting a couple starts under his belt and doing some things.
Oh, I mean, we've seen that from Kirby. I mean, what does Kirby value? It is the guy that he can trust, that is healthy and has practiced the most with the ones and twos. And in a hypothetical situation like that, I don't think you can really undervalue what Brock Vandagriff would bring. I'm genuinely curious. Does Brock's return make this the best quarterback room in the SEC, if not the country? And I ask that because of the way that quarterback position works in college football and in the NFL. I mean, you really have a massive fall off a lot of times behind a starting quarterback if the starter goes down. And what you have at Georgia right now is just sick if Brock does end up staying through the fall of 2023, like we're learning seems to be the case.
Yeah, I have a hard time saying that just because I don't really know how good Brock and Gunner can be whenever they've got a chance to actually be the guy. It could potentially be the best quarterback room in America. And I think the fact that he's staying means that they have a cohesive, very close, they've got a brotherhood there in that quarterback room. You don't come back and stay in this situation if you're not looking forward to being around those guys and being a part of what you're a part of. And So I definitely think that it's the best situation Georgia could have hoped for. It was something that I think a lot of folks were thinking, nah, no way. Georgia's going to have 2 quarterbacks on scholarship going in their next football season. Well, they're going to have 3. And Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. It's going to be 3 quarterbacks on scholarship, and that's big. And that's big for this football team, for competition, for you're a whole man, further from disaster, and having to deal with a walk on. I mean, you're going to get Jackson Muschamp ready to play, or somebody else ready to play, and pretty quickly. If Brock had decided to move on. But, listen, when he stayed around for spring, that helped you out a lot, because it was like, okay, well, the Auburn ties don't matter now, because he can't transfer to Auburn, because you can't transfer inside the SEC after February 1st and without having to sit out a year. I heard Ole Miss might be a place that would be looking to get a hold of him, even though
everybody's transferring there.
Yeah, they've got a whole.
Lane Kiffin tried to get me to transfer there.
Yeah, no, they got a stack of quarterbacks. Did you tell them you didn't play quarterback? You played tight end. They didn't care.
They didn't care.
You look like a quarterback. But no, and then I don't know, man. I think this is huge for Georgia. Is this the difference between winning and not winning a national championship? I don't know, but I do know that if we're listening to what we're told and we're trusting our information, that there was a couple of weeks there in the middle of spring practice where Brock Vandagriff was the best quarterback out there.
Yeah.
Okay. Then at the very least, worst case scenario, you've got a guy who can keep the heat on Carson Beck, and that's important, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we'll get to this when we get to Dylan Raiola to wrap up the show. But it really can't work out better for Kirby Smart and for Georgia's quarterback situation. I mean, the fact that he's won 2 national championships now, I think, gives him the get out of jail free card on the whole Justin Fields, Jake Fromm learning growing pain situation. But when you do have guys who are pushing each other, you've got another player like Vandagriff keeping Carson Beck sharp. And making him make sure he's looking over his shoulder. And it's in a harmless situation like spring practice, G-Day, fall camp. So both guys are theoretically getting better. Now, I brought this up in the show after G-Day on Sunday night, and I'm not saying this is the case right now, but it would track with what we've seen historically, that the best Georgia quarterback, or the guy who ends up being the starter, is not always the guy who performed the best at G-Day. I'm not trying to pigeonhole Carson Beck into that and say that he's going to tank or anything, but it's just a reminder that maybe there's something psychological about it. At the very least, I think it's good for competition. And for me, I was always skeptical of Brock. There's nothing personal against the guy, but coming out of single A private, nothing against Prince Avenue Christian Academy. But the competition just is not the same caliber. The players that you're playing with, not the same caliber. So I always imagined that if it was going to work out for Brock, it was going to take a longer on-ramp, I thought, than most guys, just because there's a steeper learning curve. And maybe this summer gives him the opportunity to just continue on that ramp. Maybe it's like an exponential summer for him and something clicks and he totally passes Carson Beck. But whatever happens, I mean, we went into the show tonight saying, all right, we're going to talk about some topical things, some hypothetical things, some hot take stuff we've seen throughout the week. But this to me is a pretty big development in Georgia's offseason that I wasn't expecting to hear a concrete breaking story on this, but it's a great story for Georgia fans.
Yeah, and Wes, let's get to that longer on-ramp thing that you're talking about here. That's kind of becoming the norm, isn't it? I mean, Stetson Bennett, basically 3.5 years of on-ramp before he really got it going. Carson Beck, a good 2 full years before he starts to really look good in that mop-up duty. And I go back to, all right, how did Carson Beck look in mop-up duty in 2021? Shaky, not so good, not great. How did he look in 2022 mop-up duty? fantastic. That it's becoming one of those things where it's taken some guys some time to develop. And not only that, but maybe Brock Vandagriff kind of led us into the mind that Georgia's got a brainwashing thing going on here. I don't know. Maybe there's some hypnosis. But he said, and I put it in the story, the breaking news story we wrote a little while ago, the quote whenever he came up and, back on, earlier in the month, I think it was April 4th or whatever, where he said basically, listen, if I wasn't getting better, I wouldn't have stayed. If I wasn't improving, I wouldn't have stayed. And that's why I stuck around, is because I knew I was getting better. I knew I was being challenged. And listen, that I'm telling you, that right there is going to take you a long way in life. That whole idea that, all right, listen, I can go somewhere where it's easier, and maybe I can fall into a better situation. Maybe I can stumble, maybe I can fall up the stairs that way. But I've got a place right now where I'm getting better as a player, and maybe it's not exactly how I want it to be, but maybe it's best for me. I don't know, man. That's some mature stuff. And then you also hear, something I haven't really talked about, but something I've kind of picked up bits and pieces of. And when I feel like when you add them together, you end up with a plate full. It's like being at a family reunion. You get a spoonful of everything, and you end up with 6 pounds of food, right?
Yeah, a little potato salad, some beans.
Well, spoonful of this, spoonful of that there. One thing about this quarterback room I think people need to know is that Carson Beck, Brock Vandagriff, Gunnar Stockton, beloved. All three guys very much appreciated by the guys they throw to, the guys they hand it to, and the guys who block for them. Even the guys who catch their errant passes and try to take their heads off, or would take their heads off if they didn't have non-contact jerseys. These guys are loved by their teammates. I don't know if that's a connection thing that Kirby Smart's built, or if it's just because they're just freaking awesome. I don't know.
Who is Brock Vandagriff's roommate? Brock Bowers.
Yeah.
And they hang out all the time. I mean,
apparently Brock Vandagriff has convinced Brock Bowers that he's from the country part of California, which blows my mind too. So,
wine country is not the country.
Well, they do grow muscadines in the country in Georgia, so
that's true. You can make wine out of that. You can make wine just about out of anything. I have nipples, Greg. Can you milk me? All right.